Ready.
All right, well, thank you very much for being here for this topic on prejudice and leadership. We're going to welcome the participants right now. Ladies first, we have Carolyn Bivens, who was born in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. She was the commissioner of the LPGA from 2005 until her resignation on July 13, 2009. She was the seventh person and the first woman to hold the position of commissioner since the LPGA was founded in 1950. Bivens was previously president and chief operating officer of Initiative Media North America, the largest media services agency in the United States and part of the Interpublic group of companies. At USA Today, she led the worldwide advertising operations and USA Today's international edition. In 2002, Electronic Media Magazine named Bivens one of the most powerful women in television. Then we have Franco Harris, a former NFL player. He played his first 12 years in the NFL with the Pittsburgh Steelers. His 13th and final year, 1984, with the Seattle Seahawks. He was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1990. Harris was a key player in one of the professional football's most famous plays, dubbed the Immaculate Reception. Harris's business interests include owning Super Bakery, a company founded in 1990 to produce nutrition-oriented foods, including the Super Donut for school children at public schools and for the military. Harris also partnered in 1996 to rescue the Parks Sausage Company in Baltimore, the first African-American-owned business to go public in the U.S. He's the CEO of a fast-growing company called Silver Sport, with a line of apparel products with proprietary technology. And last but certainly not least, we have Mark Sadovnick, who is originally from Montreal, lived in Miami, now LA, for more than 30 years. Recognized by Business Week in the top 150 globally most influential headhunters, CEO of Executive Search, ensuring the right fit between individual talents and management of companies. Previously executive director of the global leadership development organization called JC's International, which had close to 700,000 members at the time. Started his career with Deloitte in Canada, on the boards of directors with synergistic leaders with World Language Communications, Talentorium Alliance, Verde Exchange Institute, and Core Shorts Video. So welcome to all of you. Let's just dive right into this topic. First and foremost, it's hard not to address this topic without mentioning Donald Sterling and the fiasco that then forced him to sell the team, although I guess the most recent part of this is Shelley Sterling's attorneys have to go to court in order to get whatever the latest wrangling is, get that all settled. So I guess nothing's done until everything is done. But let's just talk about his actions and whether or not it was appropriate for him to be forced out of the NBA. Does somebody want to start? Perhaps you should start, Franco, as you're a former professional athlete.
Being an athlete and also being a businessman, there are definitely some conflicts here. Your question was...
well, was it appropriate? But let me take it into a different direction that's maybe a little bit more appropriate to the topic that we're trying to address, and that is, if you have somebody like that in a leadership role, which Donald Sterling was, does it indeed trickle down? Were the players aware that he had this kind of attitude? And could you address a certain similar situation? Were you ever in a situation where you were feeling as if the leaders in your organization perhaps weren't thinking of you as a person, maybe something else, as a product, and then a product with a certain ethnicity that they may or may not approve of?
Well, Susan, I'm a very strong believer that a lot of the culture starts at the top, and that it does come down. Now, as you know, when you have like I guess I want to say workers, or in this case players, that you have a diverse group. I really don't know the structure of the Clippers, but hearing what Sterling had to say, and also his past actions, I just find it difficult to think that this was a culture of I guess I want to say of respect,
Hmm.
of acceptance.
For the
Uh,
players themselves.
because a lot of times uh, we say, "Hey, I don't have to like you, but you're my teammate, so I will play with you."
Hmm.
And sometimes uh, players that you play with, you're not going to socialize with them uh, afterwards.
So are you
But
suggesting that the leadership would allow for that kind of, animosity, if you will, between the players?
well, I guess what I'm saying is that I'm hoping that it's not based upon color or religion or
Yeah. Everybody does
ethnicity.
not love everybody.
And because I mean, sometimes you just don't get along with
Sure.
certain guys, or certain things just don't click. But when you have a culture that we're seeing that that race did play a factor in statements that he made, to me that was very disturbing,
Okay.
and 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 to me that would have made it very hard for me to feel comfortable in that place or wanting to be part of that organization. Um, so um,
Well,
how his how
let me
his
just get
players.
let me go ahead and just jump in here because I want to bring Carolyn into the conversation since she was management with LPGA. And so, Carolyn, what is your take on this? Because to a certain extent, you can look from the C-suite down into the rest of the players. What was your take when you first heard about what Donald Sterling was all about, what he said, and then ultimately what the league decided for him?
I think there's two sides to this, and it's very much it's a great microcosm for us to focus on uh, because there's much bigger issues. I think in sports, I think in business, and I think in this country. The two things for me are biases. Um, Whatever they may be, there's a amazing professor. She's now at Harvard. She was at Yale for 20 years. She's a consultant to some of the top companies in the world. She's written a book called Blind Spots. She believes that every single one of us have something that's called implicit bias. That based on our experience, we have some bias against some group or something, and that to the extent that we deny we do, we only create a bigger issue. That it's our responsibility to figure out what that bias is, and there's lots of things that you can do to work around that. Number one. Number two, I think that this incident speaks just like the Richie Incognito issue, the Penn State issue. This is an issue of integrity. I was always told that integrity is what you do when nobody's watching.
Mm-hmm.
And in every single one of these situations, Sterling being the latest, this wasn't a surprise to very many people in the NBA. It wasn't a surprise to the sports media. It wasn't a surprise to players who have played for him for the last 20 years. But until it became a crisis, until it got into the public domain, and by the way, not via the sports media, it was someone who wasn't worried about being credentialed and getting interviews and really just kind of ticking off the team or the league, that the story broke, and only then was it addressed. And I think that all of us, whether we are employees, whether we're leaders, whatever role we play in an organization, this is a time for us to look inward. It's just not the Donald Sterlings of the world. Why didn't somebody speak up earlier, and why wasn't it addressed before it became a crisis?
Indeed. Okay. So, Mark, do you want to jump in here? Because one thing that Carolyn said that I thought was sort of interesting, if we are supposed to sort of own our biases, then what do you do in order to maintain yourself as an effective leader to your team?
Thanks, Susan. Good morning, everybody. there's a couple of things that are really interesting. First of all, that blind spot point Carolyn raised is that's actually brilliant, and I think there's two parts there I'd like to address. It starts with the kids, as it usually does, to educate from the kids up. And I'll give you the simplest of example. When I used to coach a lot of kids in sports, this was in Montreal. We had a baseball team full of everybody from Greek to black to Jewish to whatever. Long story short, parents at this town in Montreal, where they had a prison, as a matter of fact, were throwing pennies onto the field, going after the so-called the Jewish kids on the team, for that whole stereotype. And the ones that were the most embarrassed were there was 3 Jewish kids on this baseball team, and were all the other parents on our team that thought, what's going on here? The key point there is, with respect to the handling the blind spots, was that the kids saw how all the parents handled that and who they stood up for in that particular scenario. And that was the beginning, I guess, of maybe getting rid of that blind spot, which is a great term that Carolyn is referring to. So you always got to start education-wise up, from the kids up. And I'm still in contact with a lot of those kids, and they still remember that situation, how they handled it. Taking that to the corporate level, which is NBA and the Sterlings and whatnot, what I always find is there certainly is prejudice and discrimination in business, and it's natural. And Franco and Carolyn said, or you even said, we're not going to love everybody. But, I've had clients in the past tell me, and the executive, when we're doing searches, they take me to the side and they say, Mark, I want an American. And I'm saying, you want an American? I know exactly what he's talking about. He wants an American. And we would always say, well, we'll find you the best person. Or recently we did an experiment with a client doing video resumes before they met the people. And the 3 finalists, one stuttered, one was a little overweight, and one had an accent. At the end of when they finally met, they all realized that they were done with that potential discrimination of what these people had, and they can actually talk to each other as people and get over all that crap, which was awesome. So the point that leads to, I think that's great, is leadership in this case means creating an environment, in my opinion, that people will not be afraid anymore to stand up against discrimination, stand up for even whatever it might be, bullying, stand up for doing something that's wrong, but you can't because you're afraid of losing your job, etc. in the company. And that's up to leaders to create that trusting environment so people aren't afraid to do that. And it's a process. Trust is a process, but it has to happen because from a business standpoint, it absolutely affects the performance of the talent at a company.
Yeah, but when you look at Donald Sterling, and I guess I should say that his team hasn't won any championships, so did it really affect their play? But yet, people knew of his past, but just as Carolyn mentioned, but yet he still had a team of majority of the players being of African American descent. So when you look at that culture, I guess it would be that how much influence did Donald Sterling really have on the organization? What did he really try to portray or project? I guess when he gave a donation or gave money to the NAACP, was he trying to project a certain image? Did he project a certain image to some of his players? As Carolyn mentioned, though, he was sued in the past by people in his organization and players. So,
Elgin Baylor.
pardon me?
Elgin Baylor. He was sued by Elgin Baylor.
Right. So this is a hard one to read because now you have players making millions of dollars. Did they look past some things? Did they ignore some things?
Well, this sort of goes back to what Mark's comment was. I think the thing is speaking as somebody who's never been a titled person, in other words, I'm not a manager, when you're an employee, it's all about getting the job done. In my case, making slot, making sure I'm live at the time that they tell me to be live. So on a day-to-day basis, you're not really concerned about what the guy upstairs, what his attitudes are, even if it doesn't, trickle down to how you do your job, correct? So Mark, when you're saying create this environment where people may be able to speak out, it's going to be pretty hard for them to speak out against the top guy, let alone the guy that they work next to on a day-to-day basis, for fear that then that person you have to work with every day will then lash back out at you.
We know what's interesting, and maybe Carolyn can address this too. Was it Mozilla, Firefox Mozilla, the CEO, who was actually the founder of one of their biggest softwares, was it was almost like a coup d'état by the employees to take him out of there for his actions, and it's not easy. I've seen it. Cases where the employee has no choice because they can't afford to lose their jobs, so they're quiet.
Right.
What I'm trying to get across is the leaders we need to develop are the ones that understand that it's all tied in. The performance of the business of the sports team is long term. Teams that want to have consistent winning seasons, win a championship, etc., and businesses that want to have consistent winning seasons, it is all tied in with a leader that creates the environment to perform, and to perform with trust and not be bullied in the best way possible.
Yeah, but people have to remember that this situation is bigger than one team and bigger than one man.
Well,
Right.
yeah, Mark just brought up the Mozilla case. There's also the Rap Genius case. I don't know if you guys are aware of that one. This is a man by the name of Mabad Magajan. So he had written some unsavory things on a website that was talking about the Elliot Rodgers situation. Elliot was the one who went off and killed all those people in San Diego. So his comments alone, which were, I think he was meant to be kind of glib, came off as at the very least, not classy, and worse than that, it just seemed completely insensitive, and he was forced out too. So I mean, this is happening, but it does, back to what Carolyn said, bring it to the point, only in the point when it's a crisis situation, or when it's so obvious and so many more people know about it. That's when either the rest of the board of directors has to make some kind of motion to get this person out. But clearly it's one of those situations where it's more crisis. I'm talking about a situation where it's day to day, and you want to make sure that your team, your employees are doing the best job that they can. Does it start at the top? How do you make that environment where you can get these things done and people are more comfortable, as Mark says?
I want to ask Carolyn, how did you as an LPGA commissioner, how did you feel about making that environment where you wanted it to be?
We had a bit different situation. We had, it still turns out to be bias, but it was factions, really more inside the player group. That was the bigger issue, and a tricky one to navigate. But again, it's what we're talking about, which is leading by example. I do, however, feel this is sort of where this topic diverges, I think, to sports and business. And that is our culture excuses a lot of things in the sports world that we would never allow in corporate America, not for 5 seconds. I find it, a best example I can think of is Paula Deen, who admitted whatever 30 years ago she used the N-word. Then the Richie Incognito incident arises, where it was a cultural thing that was supposedly kind of indoctrinating and hazing the young players, especially one who was probably soft and from Stanford. And well, those words are just said in the locker room. And by the way, I'm sitting in my local pub hearing the same guys who wanted Paula Deen run out, and in fact, she was tarred and feathered and run out, and all of a sudden, it's just boys will be boys conversation when it comes to the Miami Dolphins and the Richie Incognito thing. And at some point, it will reach a critical mass, and we are a market-driven culture. And pretty soon, whether it's Mozilla or whatever it is, people will stop buying.
And you know what? I want to mention that, as I mentioned earlier, that it's a lot bigger than just a individual or one team. Just like in our country, we can have individuals do certain things, but as a country, we want to stand for one thing. And the so like it's very important. Like to me, it was very important that the league did get involved with this because this does affect them as a whole. And and my feeling is they had to take a stance with this um, because it's just not about Donald Sterling. It's something bigger than that. And it's the culture of the league. What does the league stand for? What does the league mean? And so, as Carolyn mentioned, where this now became very public, uh, it became very visible. People heard what was said, and it was not good, and it did not reflect good upon the league also. So uh, action, as far as I'm concerned, had to be taken from the leadership in the league. The league had to show leadership more than Donald Sterling showing leadership.
Right. I wanted to comment on that, and I guess we lost Franco's video. Hopefully, we'll recover that. But I've always had an issue with the word tolerate. Maybe it's just a pet peeve or whatever. And I know maybe the intent of the whole tolerance thing was positive. But you know, um, I grew up in Montreal, pretty simple life. A little Canadian Jewish guy moving, doing whatever, and for some reason we heard about the word tolerate, and someone told me, why are we tolerating? That doesn't make any sense. Why aren't we accepting and respecting? And even though the intent, I'm sure for most people, was tolerate as a good thing, but the word is terrible, and I think we should be conscious. And words do mean something. As much as we like to, even though we are a little politically sensitive these days, Don Rickles would and Carol O'Connor and All in the Family would never, amazingly enough, survive today. Which you'd think we'd be more advanced, that All in the Family would be able to come on now rather than 25 years ago. But why do we use words like tolerate, which again to me would be almost offensive? I want you don't have to love me, but at least accept and respect me. And that I believe, with trust, actually affects big time the performance of people in companies, in sports organizations, and as a result impacts in my world, their recruitment of top talent, their development of top talent, their retention of top talent, which helps the economy and everything. And then guess what? They create role models from that the kids see, and and it's a consistent evolution. So, anybody got any thoughts on that?
Well, and Mark, as Carolyn mentioned earlier, about everybody has biases, and I guess it always gets down to, is it learned? Is it taught at home, or where is it? Where do they pick it up? Most of the time, they mention that it's not something that just happens, or as you say, someone looks different, uh, someone has a handicap, that differences, as you said, can we tolerate differences, or uh, so, but where do they pick it up, and also for what reason? Because as we know, there's different reasons. When I think about the Constitution and just how great that paper is, I just say, wow. I mean, what that stands for, what it says, is incredible.
Right.
But then you have people that says, yes, well, all men are created equal, but uh, we have slaves over here. So for some economic advantage and for other people's ambition in other ways, that really took over the meaning of what that paper says, that all men are created equal, and some people made it in there, but there's a but. You know what I mean? So a lot of times that ambition or being self-served gets in the way.
And Franco, that's so important that, which is the central to this whole thing, which is in a leadership culture, one has to understand every person has some kind of a bias. To the extent that we find out what those are, figure out what they are, we can then manage around them. Sometimes we can even change them. There are a couple famous examples. One is the professor I was talking about at Harvard was hired a few years ago by a philharmonic orchestra because a group of women were getting ready to file a lawsuit that they were not being hired, they were being discriminated against. She met with the leadership and with the conductor who said, "This is nuts. We want the very best musicians. We're not discriminating against anyone." So she said, "Okay, that sounds fair, good intent. Tell you what, would you agree for the next year to do the auditions and the hiring behind a curtain so they would be blind auditions?" They agreed. Guess what happened? The end of the year, 30% more women had been hired. The conductor didn't understand he had a bias. He had a bias for people who looked more like him. He was comfortable with that. And then there's the famous story about, it's the Heidi phenomenon. Again, another Harvard case study, very successful man named Howard. The whole story evolves about how powerful he is and what he does. And a professor wondered what would happen if I changed Howard to Heidi. And all the facts stayed the same. And then at the end of the class, they are asked to evaluate Heidi's performance and Howard's performance. Well, Howard is somebody everybody wants to spend time with and oh my God, he's revered, he's powerful, he's respected, he's admired. She's a little greedy, she's a little self-serving, she's abrasive. It kind of goes on. And those are just two examples. So I think out of all of these, it's so easy to pile on a Donald Sterling. And God only knows he's deserved it. But I think if we don't learn a bigger lesson from this, and we don't it's the old, I can see the splinter in my neighbor's eye, I can't see the log in my own. And I think that if we all look in our own organizations and try to figure out where are the biases, where are we losing out on the very best people, not just hiring them in, who are we not including in the management and in the conversations, and we're not getting their full contributions. It's a very competitive time. If we don't figure out how to really tap into and use the best talent, then we begin to lose our edge on innovation and all the other things that go with competing worldwide.
Hey, Carolyn, I just want to say that that I don't know if any of us believe that that bias and prejudice will totally go away. We don't believe that. People will always have that for certain reasons. But it is up to good leadership to have policy and to have rules.
Sure.
So that people can't have their own biases going there. Just as you said, when that lady made him do it behind the curtain, that changed things. But it might not have changed that. Still might not have changed that guy in a certain way.
Well, that was the question that I wanted to ask all of you. If you're the man/woman at the top, who's going to tell you, You need to readjust. You need to perhaps have some kind of either sensitivity training or something that may change your worldview. Who's going to say that to the guy at the top, woman at the top?
Well, the board of directors could start if they were really aligned with what the vision is of the company. And related to that, and I'll just take the lead and then and pass it on. Related to that, it used to be even on board of directors, it was all men, all the good old boys club. It was all from the same industry. They were all mostly related to finance. Now, when we do board of directors searches, we're both working with and educating the CEOs of the company and other board members that guess what? There's expertise in other industries you can use in your board. There's expertise in being visionary to help the CEO look further down the road. And there's also expertise in long-term success, or as I compare a lot of things to sports, long-term winning, consistent winning seasons over and over and over again by how you take care of your people. And if you take care of your talent, like what Franco and Carolyn were talking about, if you take care of your talent, they'll take care of their customers, they'll take care of their vendors, and they'll be proud. And here's something you don't hear that often anymore, like 50 years ago. I'm proud of where I work. It's awesome. And with social media, again, this is how the whole leadership thing evolves. With social media, the good and the bad gets out. And if you can get the employees saying this is a great place to work, a great city to work in, they'll put it out there. Their spouses will put it out there. Their kids will say, my dad works, you ever see that commercial? My mom works at GE. She creates all this wonderful stuff. That's leadership, and that's role modeling, as well. And one last little example, again, it's a little bit of another discrimination. We had a client who had a sales team. One individual was doing unbelievable, selling, but hoarding clients and everything. 10 other salespeople on the team were doing terrible. The morale sucked, and the question was, oh my God, how do we get rid of this person? He's making all our sales. Tough decision. And he knew it. He had the leverage because he was making all the sales and obviously was hoarding the relationship, so he'd own it. They made the right decision, at least in my mind, this guy wasn't going to change. They had to let him go. The other 10 people made a mixed men, women, didn't matter. Guess what? They started to thrive like crazy. And the passion went through the company and through their clients and whatever, and they're doing great. Now, was it scary for management to get rid of that salesperson? Absolutely. But, they couldn't have the money thing discriminate the decisions that they were making. And that was leadership.
That is leadership. I'm not sure that that's common.
Those are the tough decisions to make. But you either, Franco said, you have policies. Everybody has mission statements. Everybody has vision statements. The question is, are they things that are on the wall or put in the drawer?
Hey, Carolyn, can I just interrupt for one quick second on that? Enron had their mission and their values on the wall in their lobby.
Right. And I was there 2 weeks before the famous fall down. But it's, do you live them? And are they organic and are they inculcated in the organization, or are they just things that are on the wall? I'll also say that it's, in some respects, it's not as complicated as it may seem at first. Part of it is talking to the employees, and for the leader, whomever that is, to stay connected. One of the most frightening personal situations I was ever in had to do with somebody who worked for me for almost 20 years. We'd started at Xerox together. I brought him over from Xerox to USA Today, and he worked for me there. And he rose to run a very big part of an important phone operation. And I found out a couple weeks after an event that a customer that had a particular issue with a salesperson that he had been working with had been elevated to Tony. Tony solved the issue and wanted to make sure that it was solved. And in so doing, the customer said something, you couldn't tell that Tony was African American over the phone, said something so insulting I would never, ever even repeat. And I found out about it, and I just got a lump in my throat, and I asked Tony out for drinks. And I said, okay, I'm going to ask you the toughest thing I've ever asked anybody. Have I created an environment that you felt like success and turning in the sale was so much more important than self-respect or standing up? Did you not feel that you could turn that business down? And Tony's response is something that informed the rest of my career, which was, try as you might, you didn't grow up in my skin. I knew you would have supported me. But for me, winning was to take his money off the table and to run that business. So policies, or those of us who are trying to manage fair and equitably, sometimes we need to not generalize and just simply ask the really hard questions and be prepared for what may not be a perfect answer.
Makes sense.
You ever watch
Franco?
Undercover Boss?
Yes.
Yes.
What amazes me from some great CEOs is almost all the time they go out and they say, wow, I didn't know this was happening in my company.
Well,
And
Eric
and
Shinseki.
and also you have to remember that when you go through certain things, it's not as traumatic a lot of times. You know what I mean? Where
Yes.
sure you don't, you don't want to, you don't like it and being disrespectful, because it's just uh, uh, like on the football field. And you heard, back in the day that, like a lot of the players would use the N-word to African American players that are playing. Okay, but the whole thing is that, well, you can't respond in that way. Just like with Jackie Robinson, with what happened to him, and his whole thing was how he handled it, and and sure, it's not right. But at what time, how do you handle that particular situation? Now, there could be another situation where you handle it differently. But some situations, you try to make that decision at that time, what's best. Sometimes not just for me, but for the team, and what's best for the company right at this time, to where you let things go that really, someone making a statement, someone feeling a certain way, hey, that's not going to change my self-esteem. That's not going to change who I am. So I'm not worried about how that person feels, because that person, in a way, is not that important to me either as a person.
Oh, I just lost Skype. Let me see if I can
We,
restore.
we hear you. We lost some of the video. It's coming back.
Let me just ask this question, speaking again as somebody who works in the trenches. I think it's sort of interesting that in the corporation that I work for, that now and again, if there is an issue in the corporation, and I mean in the greater corporation, that then the rank and file will have to take a, a basically a video course where we're asked whether or not we're sort of quizzed on whether what we would do. It's multiple choice, so it's not really that revealing. And I don't want to give a specific example. I just want to point out that it seems a bit insincere. So, for example, if the company, the greater corporation, was basically given some kind of penalty for a violation in the journalism world, then for those of us far, far away from that organization are asked to do these quizzes, like what would you do? Would you do this? Would you? And a lot of it has to do with conflicts of interest. Oftentimes, at least for me, and I know the rest of my colleagues feel this way, it feels insincere. It feels like, okay, yeah, we know that you got caught doing that. You, meaning, all the way up to the top of the corporate ladder. But I don't operate that way, and I am a little offended that it's coming down to me to ask me whether or not I would engage in that kind of behavior. And so I guess I'm not sure where my question is, other than to say, where do you go? How do you make that edict from the top offices go down to the rank and file, and yet make people like me understand what the purpose is? So the purpose is not to vilify me or to make me feel like that I have the potential to violate codes of ethics or what have you, but just so that everybody is on board and is educated. But as I said, sometimes it feels a little insincere.
Well, I just want to start on that while we get some videos back, and then it'd be great to pass it on to Carolyn and Franco from their perspective. But I actually think it starts with hiring the right leader at the beginning, and this is where I'll pass it to Carolyn and Franco. The same way as hiring the right player. These days, more than ever, they they look at and interview the players for their character as much as their ability to play. Because if they're looking long term, the character is going to play a huge part in the consistent winning of the team. So again, I think it starts with right at the beginning, bringing in that right leader, assessing him or her, that they understand and align with the vision of where the company's going and the character and the values of the company or sports team. What do you guys think?
Hey, Susan, there's no doubt that you can't legislate stuff like that, how people feel, their morals, all that kind of stuff. You can't legislate that. But to me, it's still important to have policy and legal stuff so people know where you stand if something does come up. But it all starts with leadership, and they always look at the example of leadership. Because if they have that policy, if they have things written down, and the leadership doesn't follow it, then that means nothing. But if it is written, or even if it's not written, but the leadership, they lead a certain way, they behave a certain way, I tell you what, that means more than anything written. So that's very, very important.
I think I agree, and I think that's easy to say. But my question from here would be, when ultimately you have to serve either the stockholders, or in my situation, you just need to produce that product that's going to go into a newscast. Sometimes those are the things that go away. That takes it goes into the background, basically, because you are so goal oriented, and the goals don't always necessarily include the rest of what you're talking about, being a good leader, or having a good environment for all your employees. Wouldn't you say? I mean, the bottom line for any company is to make the money. If they're a publicly owned company, they have to serve the stockholders. If you're not publicly owned, the bottom line is you still have to be profitable.
Yeah, but if you still look at sportsmanship, and just like in golf, sport, we all have our rules. And if someone tries to cheat, right, Carolyn, if a ball, like if someone tries to cheat out there on the golf course to win, what happens?
Yeah.
That person's out of there, right?
Right.
And so, but that comes with the leadership to enforce that sort of thing. And like, unless you want to, say change the rules of the game, that things are set, and to me that comes from the leadership, how the culture is out there on the course, how the culture is out there on the field, that sportsmanship, that's something that's built over time, and that's the meaning of that sport. And to me, that's what a corporation has to build. It has to build a meaning. What do we mean? And then each person has their own responsibility. But you make it a culture where they feel, hey, Carol, on that golf course, a lot of people would feel bad if they did something, that they're not supposed to do. And and to me, that's what's important, that to build that culture of, hey, this is the way we do it, and and if you don't, you should feel bad, you should be blah blah blah.
But what if it comes at the expense of the company as a whole in its
Well,
profitability?
you know what, Susan, if I can just interject, and it will come it will impact the company's profitability, and that's the message you got to get across. And actually, no, it's true that, and to make this work, it's got to tie in exactly to the profitability of the company, the consistent profitability. I compared a lot to, hiring a coach for a team. If you tell that coach he's got to win this year or he's fired, he's going to make all sorts of crazy decisions just to win this year and not care about the next 10 years of the team, because he's got to win. Same thing. We got to get the stock price up this year or you're fired. Your decision making is going to be different. So isn't a true leader someone that looks with his board of directors as to, we want 5 to 10 years of winning seasons, and we will make decisions accordingly to that. So exactly what Frank was saying, you're developing a culture. You can't develop a culture in a month or 2 or 3 or 4
Sure.
even. So that's what I think has to happen. That's what a leader does.
Susan, I think in your specific example, I think social media has made some of this much more difficult. You know, 15 years ago at USA Today, if someone had breached editorial ethics, the publisher would have come in, or the editor, and pulled everybody together and had a really frank conversation about it because it infected the whole unit. You can't do that today because within minutes, probably still while everybody's gathered, tweets are going to be going out and something's going to be posted on Facebook. And so some of those very frank conversations just can't take place, especially a news organization is a great example. So you get things like what you interpret as disingenuous surveys. There are some middle grounds, and it's always good for a CEO or executive team to have. There are specialized consultants that will come in and evaluate their performance in a 360-degree manner every year. If you can't afford it every year, I believe companies should and organizations should do it every couple of years. Then you've got somebody that's a third party who's talking to reporters or players, talking to customers. Sometimes we think we are perceived very differently than we actually are. And I think the unfiltered constructive feedback helps the organization. The other point I want to make is that we have to move beyond thinking that operating ethically and equitably is mutually exclusive with
Right.
great productivity and profits.
Right.
It's in fact not. And you want to take it into the sports world because it's so visible. Look at somebody like a Tony Dungy. Look at his record. Look at how he's revered. Look at how he conducted himself, how players who played for him still feel about him. So they're really not mutually exclusive, though I think sometimes we tend to believe we have to choose to do the most profitable thing or the right thing.
Nice.
And I want to touch on what Mark mentioned about getting the best candidate, the right candidate, and that's so important, to where people can get by their biases and pick the best one, the most qualified, and also at times, though, like, I feel that people have to provide opportunity, and and because in certain categories that aren't, where you definitely need this skill, that skill, that skill. Um, Say in sales, uh, people just have different levels of different things, but it all comes down to the person, and the personality of that person, to me, makes a big difference. And so would you pick that person based upon what? And, and, and so hopefully, um, based on that, if someone feels a bias towards a certain group or a certain ethnicity, or a certain color, that the leadership can help change that and provide opportunity. And then as we see through history that all through American history, when immigrants came all along the way, uh, that someone somewhere along the line opened up the door, and it made for people to be able to achieve great things. So opportunity is very important.
All right, we should probably wrap this up, but Mark, since Carolyn and Franco had their last words, what about you? Would you like to say something before we wrap it up?
That was their last words. I don't believe that. Um, no, I guess to wrap it up, I think everybody's correct here on picking the right individuals who are truly the leaders long term. But and part of that comes from you know, once you pick the right leader, then it's how that leader handles situations like precedents in law. You know, if you handle, you know, people are going to be looking at how you handle situations along the way to determine are you really true to that culture, true to your words, you know, and not going to be, you know, not succumb to pressure. And I'll go back to my kids' story. You know, I'm fortunate enough, you know, I get together with a lot of kids I've coached over the years, and not to use a cliche, I probably learned more from them than them from me. But they still remember how that situation was handled by the coaches, by the parents. And that, you know, I have executives to this day that will tell me their confidence is based on some small sports event that a coach made them feel great accomplishing when they were a kid. It's almost scary how fragile we are, but they hold on to that one accomplishment and how they were treated and how their self-esteem and respect was taught, etc. And that takes them through their whole life. So exactly what Franco and Carolyn have been saying right here, it starts even right then, and it's up to us as individuals to make that happen over and over and over again. And it's not a job; it's actually easy. It's actually more fun and easier. So,
But Mark, I want to follow up with that.
you see, I told you it wasn't Franco's last word.
You know, like to know the history, but going forward, uh, sometimes the past could be a good guide, but there could be decisions that you need to make that could conflict with the past, depending upon what that past culture was.
Sure.
And so for a new leadership to be able to look at today and really what's needed today and what's right to move everything forward today. So hopefully leaders can make that jump when it's needed, and to keep moving us forward.
Nicely said. Nicely said, all three of you. All right, well, thank you very much. I think it was a rousing conversation on this topic of prejudice and leadership. We will end it here.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Hey, Carolyn,